A rude bus driver roughly grabs a quiet passenger by the collar, not realizing it's Keanu Reeves, who is simply trying to help an elderly woman board. Within minutes, other passengers recognize the star, record the incident, and report the driver, who quickly faces suspension while Keanu calmly diffuses the situation and even pays for everyone's fares. The viral story becomes a reminder that karma hits fast, and you should treat every stranger with respect, famous or not. I didn't wake up that morning thinking I'd watch a man grab Keanu Reeves by the collar on a city bus. I just thought it was going to be another long, ordinary day where kindness came last, and everybody was too tired to care. By the time I climbed onto the number 27 bus, my feet felt like concrete. I'd just finished a double shift at the hospital, my scrub still smelling faintly like disinfectant and coffee. The late afternoon sun was hitting the bus windows at that angle where everything looks a little more tired than it really is, people, buildings, even the sky. I tapped my card on the reader, heard the approving beep, and lifted my eyes to the driver. He looked worse than I felt. Middle-aged, thick shoulders stuffed into a worn transit jacket, jaw clenched so tight I could see a muscle jumping near his temple. His name tag said M. Lawson, but his eyes said not today. There was a stack of crumpled papers shoved between the dashboard panels, schedule printouts, maybe complaints, who knows, and his phone kept lighting up on the little shelf beside him, buzzing with unanswered calls. "Move it, please," he muttered, not even looking at me. "We're already behind." The words weren't especially cruel, but the way he spit them out made something in my chest tighten. I'd spent 12 hours trying to be gentle with people in pain, swallowing my own frustration, and here was a stranger who couldn't spare a single soft syllable. I stepped into the aisle, exhaled, and turned to find a seat, and that's when I noticed him. He was sitting a few rows back on the right, halfway hidden under a faded black baseball cap and a gray hoodie. A worn backpack rested on his knees, his hands loosely folded over it. There was nothing loud about him. No phone out, no headphones in, no restless leg bouncing against the floor. Just stillness. His posture was relaxed in that way you only see in people who have made peace with being looked at and also not being looked at. Our eyes met for half a second. He gave me a small, almost apologetic smile, the kind strangers share when they're both too tired to talk but not so numb they've forgotten how to be human. I smiled back, dropped into a nearby seat, and told myself he only looked familiar because I'd been awake too long. The bus lurched away from the curb, groaning like it hated its job as much as the driver did. People were scattered in their usual clusters. A teenage boy with chipped black nail polish and a skateboard, an older man in a suit scrolling through emails that were probably ruining his evening, a young mother rocking a baby in a stroller that was too big for the cramped aisle. Every time we hit a bump, the stroller's wheels rattled against the floor like tiny drums. I pulled out my phone, thought about scrolling through social media, then shoved it back into my pocket. I didn't have the energy to envy anyone else's fake happiness. I watched the city slide past instead. The laundromat where an old couple always folded clothes together, the corner store with the peeling blue sign, the mural of a girl with wings someone had painted over the graffiti on 9th. The bus stopped again. More people crowded in, a pair of tourists arguing softly in Spanish over a map, a college kid juggling a cello case and a tote bag, a woman in a floral dress holding a cheap bouquet of red roses that were already starting to droop. She was maybe in her late 60s, her gray hair pulled into a loose bun, one hand wrapped around a cane. She paused at the door, looking up at the steps like they were a mountain. "Ma'am, you gonna get on?" the driver snapped, tapping the steering wheel with 2 fingers. "We're late." Her fingers tightened around the cane. "I'm trying," she said, her voice small but clear. I felt that familiar war inside me, the part that wanted to jump up and help, and the part that was so drained it just sat there, watching, hating myself a little for being frozen. The man in the hoodie didn't freeze. In one smooth motion, he was up and moving toward the front, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He didn't rush, didn't make a show of it. He just reached the door, stepped down to the sidewalk, and offered the woman his arm as if they'd known each other for years. "Take your time," he said quietly. "I've got you." His voice had that warm, slightly rough edge that makes you lean in to hear more. The woman looked startled, then grateful, her eyes shining with a relief I recognized all too well. One step at a time, he helped her onto the bus, steady as a railing. Behind the wheel, the driver let out a harsh sigh. "Come on, man," he barked. "You don't get off once you're on, that's not how it works. I'm not running a charity." The words hit me like a slap, but the man in the hoodie didn't flinch. He helped the woman to the nearest open seat, waited until she was settled and her flowers were safe on her lap, then turned back toward the front. "Sorry," he said, his voice calm. "She just needed a hand." "Yeah, and I need to be on time," the driver shot back. "You think my boss cares why I'm late? Sit down. Next time don't play hero." There was a tense little silence on the bus. I could feel it, the shame, the anger, the helplessness curling between all of us like smoke. The teenage boy with the skateboard rolled his eyes. "Dude, relax, it took like 30 seconds." The driver whipped his gaze to the rearview mirror. "You want to drive this bus, kid?" The boy looked away, chewing on his lip. The mother with the stroller pulled her baby closer, as if conflict were a draft she could keep out with her arms. The man in the hoodie didn't argue. He just gave the driver a small nod, the kind you offer someone who's already too far gone into their own storm, and started to move down the aisle. As he passed, the older woman caught his sleeve. "Gracias," she murmured. "You remind me of my husband. He used to do little things like that. The world feels different when someone cares, even a little." His face softened, and for a moment I saw all the lines of it, even under the cap, even in the dim bus light. Something about the way he tipped his head, the way kindness sat so easily on his features, tugged at my memory. "It's no problem at all," he said. "He sounds like a good man." "He was," she said, "not rich, not famous, but good." She patted his hand. "That's what matters in the end." The word famous echoed in my head, pinging off something half-buried and persistent. I studied him more closely, the strong jaw, the dark stubble, the tired but gentle eyes. My heart did a weird little skip. No, it couldn't be. Why would he be on this bus, dressed like that, moving through the world like any of us? I forced myself to look away, feeling ridiculous. Lack of sleep does that, I told myself. Makes regular people look like movie stars and hard days feel like the end of the world. The bus rolled on, swallowing blocks of the city. The driver grumbled under his breath at every red light. The phone on his shelf buzzed again and again until finally, with an angry huff, he snatched it up, glanced at the screen, and tossed it back down face first. "Everything okay up there?" Someone called from the back, trying to sound light. "Just drive," he snapped. I studied the side of his face in the overhead mirror. The anger was real, but behind it I saw something else. Fear, maybe, or exhaustion that had gone sour. I knew that look. I'd seen it in patient families at 3 in the morning after the 5th bad update from a doctor. Sometimes people didn't explode because they were bad, but because they had nowhere safe to fall apart. I almost felt sorry for him, almost. The bus jerked as he took the next corner too fast. The stroller wheels rattled, the cello case thunked against a seat. Someone muttered a curse. The man in the hoodie reached up instinctively, bracing himself on the overhead rail, his other hand shooting out to steady the stroller before it tipped. "Easy," he said softly to the mother. "You're okay, you're both okay." She gave him a grateful, shy smile. "Thank you again." He shrugged it off with that same quiet humility, like this was just what people were supposed to do for each other. I watched him, feeling something in me loosen a little, like a knot untangling. I'd spent the whole day patching up bodies, but I'd started to believe there wasn't much hope for hearts. Then here was this stranger, just choosing to be decent. No cameras, no audience. Just a bus full of nobodies who, for all he knew, would forget him 2 stops later. Except I couldn't shake the feeling that forgetting him was going to be impossible. We were 3 stops away from my apartment when it happened. At the next corner, the bus slowed. I could see an elderly man in a wheelchair waiting at the upcoming stop, shoulders hunched against the wind, a plastic grocery bag hanging from one handle. The light ahead was yellow, about to turn red. The driver saw it. I watched his eyes cut from the wheelchair to the traffic light and back again. His fingers tightened on the steering wheel. "Don't you dare," I whispered under my breath. He gunned it. The engine roared, the bus surged forward, and in a blink we were gliding past the stop, the wheelchair man's hopeful face sliding along the windows like a shadow. He lifted a hand as if to flag us down, then let it drop when it became clear we weren't stopping. "Hey," the teenage boy shouted, "you missed him." "We're full," the driver snapped, even though we were. "Not my problem if people can't get out earlier." A hot wave of shame rolled through me. I pressed my palms against my knees, nails digging into the fabric of my scrubs. The man in the wheelchair grew smaller in the side window, until he was just another piece of the city we always pretended not to see. Then I heard the bell. The stop requested chime rang out sharp and insistent, even though we'd just blown past a stop. Everyone looked up. The little red stop requested light glowed above the driver's head. The man in the hoodie was standing again, one hand on the yellow cord, his expression no longer simply gentle. There was something else there now, quiet firmness, a line drawn very clearly in the sand. "Open the doors," he said, his voice still calm but different now. "You need to go back for him." The driver let out a bitter laugh. "You think this is your private limo, man? Sit down, you don't tell me how to do my job." "It's not about your job," the man said. "It's about that man in the wheelchair you just left behind." "We're on a schedule," the driver shot back. "If I stopped for every sob story, I'd never get home. Sit down, last warning." I could feel the entire bus holding its breath. My heart was hammering so hard it made my vision pulse at the edges. The older woman with the roses clutched her bouquet tighter, petals trembling. The teenage boy shifted his skateboard to his other hand. The mother hugged her baby close, eyes darting between the two men. The man in the hoodie took a step closer to the front. "Then call your supervisor," he said quietly. "Tell them you were delayed because you chose to do the right thing." The driver's chair squeaked as he spun around, fury snapping across his face like a live wire. He shot to his feet, the bus swaying slightly as his weight shifted. "You don't come on my bus and tell me what's right," he growled, jabbing a finger toward the man's chest. "I've had it with people like you. Sit down." The man didn't move. For a heartbeat, everything froze. The traffic outside, the conversations, the world. All I could hear was the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights and the roar of blood in my ears. Then, with a sudden, violent motion, the driver reached out, grabbed the man by the collar of his hoodie and yanked him forward. The cap tilted back just enough for the light to hit his face fully. And as his features came into focus, clear and undeniable, my breath caught in my throat and the words formed silently in my mind. "Oh my God, that's Keanu Reeves." For a second, no one moved, like the whole bus forgot how to breathe. The driver's fist was still twisted in the front of his hoodie, knuckles white, but all I could see now was the face under the cap, those tired, kind eyes I'd seen in a dozen movies, the familiar lines around his mouth, the way his expression stayed calm even with a grown man yanking him forward. It was like watching a scene from a film, except the air smelled like diesel and sweat, and my heart was pounding in my real, exhausted chest. The teenage boy with the skateboard was the first one to say it out loud. His voice came out in a cracked whisper that cut through the shocked silence. "Yo, that's Keanu Reeves." Heads turned so fast I heard someone's neck pop. The older woman with the roses blinked hard, as if her brain was trying to match the man who had held her arm with the one from the posters she'd walked past for years. The young mother's mouth fell open. Even her baby seemed to quiet, sensing something had shifted in the room. The driver didn't let go. "If you think pretending to be somebody is gonna scare me, it's not," he snarled, leaning in closer, his breath hot and sour. "I deal with drunks and scammers every night. You're just another loudmouth who—" "I'm not pretending to be anybody," Keanu said, and there was no show in his voice, no anger, just a steady sadness that somehow felt heavier than if he'd shouted. He didn't shove the driver off or push his hand away. He kept his arms loose at his sides, as if he was afraid that fighting back would make things worse for everyone else. "You're hurting my shirt, man, and you're scaring people." I realized my fingers were already dialing 911 in my pocket, muscle memory from too many emergencies at work. I hovered over the last digit, my thumb shaking. Part of me wanted sirens and uniforms and order. Another part knew that once I made that call, everything on that bus would get louder, harder, messier. And in the middle of all of it stood a man whose entire life had been played out under other people's cameras, who had clearly tried very hard today to be invisible. The cameras came anyway. The skateboard kid lifted his phone with trembling hands, angling it toward the front. "Dude, let go of him," he said, his voice gaining strength. "You can't just grab people. That's Keanu freaking Reeves." A businessman too rose back, raised his phone too, no longer hunched over his work emails. A teenager in headphones slipped one earbud out and started recording without a word. I saw screens lighting up like little stars across the bus, each one catching the driver's clenched jaw, each one framing the same ugly scene from a slightly different angle. "Put the phones away," the driver barked, finally dropping his grip on Keanu's collar just long enough to throw his hand up toward the crowd. "You can't film me without permission. It's against the law. It's not, the businessman said quietly. Public space, public employee, you know that. The driver's cheeks flushed a blotchy red that climbed to his ears. He dropped back into his seat with a curse, grabbed the steering wheel like he wanted to strangle it instead, and slammed his foot on the gas. The bus lurched forward so abruptly that half of us stumbled. The older woman's roses slipped from her lap and scattered onto the floor in a red cloud. Keanu reached down at once, scooping the flowers up before anyone could step on them. He moved with that odd mix of grace and awkwardness he was famous for, like he was always careful not to take up more space than he needed. He placed the bouquet back into the woman's trembling hands and gave her a small, reassuring nod. "I'm fine," he murmured, almost apologizing. "I'm sorry your day got dragged into this." She shook her head, gray bun quivering. "No, Majito, he should be the one sorry. You did nothing wrong." As he straightened, his gaze slid to the window. Outside, the city blurred by, but I saw his eyes fix on something specific. The figure in the wheelchair at the last stop, now far behind us, growing smaller in the distance. Regret crossed his face like a shadow. "He's still out there," Keanu said, more to himself than to anyone else. "Just waiting." I felt that sentence settle deep inside me. It wasn't dramatic, but it was full of a quiet ache. This was a man who had known waiting, waiting for doctors, waiting for phone calls, waiting for grief to ease. I recognized that look because I'd worn it in hospital hallways at 3 in the morning, counting heartbeats on monitors and lost chances. The bus swung hard into the next lane, too hard. A cyclist shouted, a horn blared, and in the sudden chaos the front tires hit a pothole big enough to swallow a shoe. The whole vehicle bounced. Someone screamed. The stroller rolled, the cello case slid, and my stomach jumped into my throat. Keanu stumbled toward the front, his hand flying out to catch himself. By some wicked twist of physics and fate, the only thing in reach was the driver. His fingers landed on the man's forearm, not gripping hard, just anchoring himself so he wouldn't topple into the windshield. But the driver jerked his arm away like he'd been burned. "Don't touch me," he shouted, spittle catching in the corner of his mouth. "You trying to make me crash now? You want to be a hero that bad, huh?" "That's not what happened," I said, the words finally breaking loose before I could stop them. My voice came out sharper than I meant, but I didn't care. "You hit the pothole because you're driving like a maniac. He just kept himself from falling." For a moment, the driver and I locked eyes in the rearview mirror. I saw everything there, the sleepless nights, the ignored calls, the stack of warnings on his dashboard, the pride that had hardened into something almost unrecognizable. His anger wasn't new. It had been growing for a long time, like mold on damp walls. "Stay out of this," he hissed. "All of you, I'm the one in charge here. You're passengers. You sit, you shut up." "Nah, man," the skateboard kid muttered. "Not anymore." He said it so quietly I don't think the driver heard, but everyone else did. I saw shoulders straightening, jaws setting. The fragile spell of helplessness that always hangs over public spaces like buses and trains, where everyone pretends not to see each other, was breaking. We were looking now, at the driver, at ourselves, at the lines we were willing to let other people cross. Keanu took a slow breath, then another. You could actually see him choose his next words, like a man picking up a delicate piece of glass he didn't want to drop. "Look," he said to the driver, voice gentler than the man deserved. "I get it, you're under pressure. People are calling, you're late. Life's not simple. I know that better than most." He paused, eyes flicking to the buzzing phone on the little shelf. "But you left a man in a wheelchair on the side of the road. You grabbed me by the collar in front of a bus full of people. This isn't about me being somebody. It's about you being kind, even when it's hard." "Spare me the speech," the driver snapped. "You think being famous makes you some kind of moral compass. You don't know anything about my life." "You're right," Keanu said softly. "I don't, but I do know you'll feel this later. You'll see his face again, the guy at the stop. You'll remember this moment. It doesn't go away, trust me." There was something in the way he said, "trust me," that made my skin prickle. A quiet weight, like he was speaking from scars he never showed anyone on magazine covers. The driver snorted, but his hands weren't as steady on the wheel anymore. He reached for his phone, maybe out of habit, maybe to shut off the constant buzzing. As he flipped it over, I saw the caller ID flash across the screen for a split second in the mirror. "Dispatch, supervisor." The phone vibrated so hard it almost shimmied off the shelf. At the same time, the little radio clipped near the dashboard crackled to life, a flat metallic voice cutting through the thick tension in the air. Unit 27, this is Central. You missed a scheduled stop with a mobility passenger. We've received a complaint. Please respond. The driver froze. Nobody said a word. The only sounds were the hum of the engine and the faint clicking of phone cameras still recording. Unit 27, respond, the radio insisted, a little louder now. We're tracking your route. You need to acknowledge. His hand hovered over the radio, shaking. I saw the moment he realized he was trapped, caught between the rules he'd broken, the witnesses around him, and the man he'd just manhandled whose face was known on every continent. Keanu watched him, quiet and unreadable. The rest of us watched too, a bus full of strangers suspended in the same breath, waiting to see which way this man's life was about to turn. The driver swallowed hard, reached for the radio at last, and before his fingers could close around it, red and blue lights flashed suddenly across the front windshield, washing the whole bus in pulsing color as a police cruiser slid up alongside us and hit its siren.